Welcome to CDR Horizons, a new series from OpenAir hosted by Charles and myself, Harsh, in which we engage leading researchers about novel carbon removal technology that they're developing in their labs. CDR Horizons will explore the future of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and we're excited to have you on this journey.
In this episode, we speak with Xiaoyang Shi, a postdoc at Columbia University, about his work on moisture swing absorbents for carbon capture. Moisture swing is an increasingly popular technology for direct air carbon capture machines, which work by absorbing and releasing the captured CO2 based on the relative humidity of the environment. In this episode, we hear from Xiaoyang about his journey into carbon capture, his recent work on developing better moisture swing absorbents, and the various efficiency benefits that moisture swing absorbents have over other types of technologies. If you're interested in following more research, definitely like and subscribe to our channel for more content. And now, on to the show.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having me today and the great introduction. My name is Xiaoyang Shi. You can call me Yang. Currently, I'm excited to share with you my research on direct air capture of CO2. I hope I can convince you direct air capture is feasible and what the current stage of direct air capture of CO2 is. The first thing we need to prove is direct air capture is thermodynamically feasible, because I think audience here are familiar with direct air capture and the technology, and we know global is warming and renewable energy is not enough. So this is the formula of minimum energy cost of gas capture by a sorbent from a mixed gas flow. The energy cost of direct air capture is about 20 kilojoule per mole of CO2. It's doubled the energy cost from power plant, but not order of magnitude. So an energy we can get from burning gasoline is about 700 kilojoule to release 1 mole of CO2. So we can pay the energy penalty. When people tell you heavier than air flight is impossible, you could look out the window. There are birds out there. They are definitely heavier than air. So we need to work from the first principle. And now it's not the dilution of CO2 matters, it's sorbent price matters. Currently, direct air capture has reduced from $600 to about $200. It will have practical interest when the price is below $100. We have seen wind turbine, PV panel, and lighting have reduced 100-fold from the beginning. Direct air capture only needs to reduce 10-fold from current stage. And we can do some back of envelope calculation to see whether people have enough capability to produce enough device to capture all CO2 back from the air. If we have a device, its size is the standard shipping container, and it filled with our sorbent of CO2 fully. This amount of sorbent can capture 1 ton of CO2 per day. And I calculated based on the current sorbent capacity. If we have 100 million of this device, we can capture all emitted CO2 from human being per year. That's about 36 gigaton of CO2. And if we plan to spend 10 years to achieve this goal, it means we need to produce 10 million of the device per year, right? So can we produce enough of the device per year? Shanghai Harbor can process 40 million full containers per year. And also people can produce car and truck, 80 millions of them per year. So we have enough capability to produce this amount of direct air capture device to capture all CO2 back from the air and make human being in a neutral world. So sorbent material is the heart of direct air capture technology. I have summarized that there are 6 typical technologies. The first is electrochemical swing sorption. Professor Hatton from MIT leads this technology. And the moisture swing sorption. Professor Lechner from Arizona State University works on this technology. And Dr. Kostossin from Oak Ridge National Lab used the amino acid solution to capture CO2. And many groups such as Professor Jones from Georgia Tech and Professor Park from Columbia University are using amine materials to capture CO2 from the air. And Professor Case from Harvard University, who founded Carbon Engineering, that company is using strong-base sodium hydroxide method to capture CO2, and also physical sorption. That is not very promising at current stage because the binding energy of CO2 and the sorbent is too weak. Each technology has its own advantage and disadvantages. This figure simply shows the moisture swing technology in Professor Lechner's group, how it works. The sorbent stands in air like trees to capture CO2 from the ambient air. The difference is this sorbent's kinetics is 100,000 fast than the natural trees. And we make it stand in wind, and after it's fully loaded, we put it into the water, it will release CO2. Then we can collect the high concentration of CO2 for utilization. After that, we take the sorbent out from the water and dry it in the air. It can capture CO2 again. This is the cycle. So this figure shows this performance of our sorbent under different humidity level. The equilibrium saturation status of the sorbent under different humidity level. In the extremely dry condition, for example, it's like in desert, Las Vegas, the sorbent can be fully loaded. In a moist environment like New York City, the sorbent can be 70% loaded. And in a relatively high humidity surrounding, our sorbent can only be 50% functional, like in Seattle. The red figure shows under dry condition and wet condition, what is the equilibrium CO2 concentration above the sorbent. The wet condition is about 500-fold times than the dry condition. It means after the sorbent is fully loaded in the ambient air, then we wet the sorbent in a box, it will give the CO2 back. And we can have 500 times higher CO2 concentration in the box than the 400 ppm condition. I give one example of our sorbent. In this work, I assembled a resin particle. It's one ion exchange resin we are using in our lab with electrospan fibers. There is the polymer. We use the additive removal technique to create a porosity of the fibers, so the resin particles can contact with the air easily. And this figure here shows the ion exchange resin's performance. In this work, I assembled a resin particle in an electrospan fiber. I used the polymer additive removal technique to create the porosity of this fiber. So the resin particle, that's a functional material we're using in our lab to capture CO2. It can contact with the air more easily. And the right figure shows under per gram of the sorbent and per hour, how fast and how many CO2 our sorbent can capture. The red circle, we can see from the right column, it has the best performance compared to the amine stuff, that's a thermal swing, and the other IER, that's ion exchange resin we are using in our lab. This figure is the energy cost of all 5 direct air capture technologies in current market. Because other technologies require heat for regeneration, and our sorbent only needs water, so it has the lowest energy cost. Moisture swing technology has its advantages. This technology only consumes water rather than heat energy. Our sorbent captures water and releases CO2. Or it captures CO2, release water. Most of sorbent captures CO2, meanwhile also capture water. So when we regenerate the material, there is the energy penalty to hit water molecules in their sorbent. There is the energy penalty. And the moisture swing can simplify the system design since it doesn't need heat or cool the material. And lastly, moisture is flexible and it can be amplified by thermal. Professor Shaw and Lively published the paper on Nature overviewed 7 chemical separation could change the world if we don't use heat. Because purifying mixture without using heat, we could lower global energy use. And we should keep this in mind when we develop a new method for direct air capture technology in the future. We cannot afford doing anything to the air before CO2 sorption. We cannot compress it, we cannot heat it, and we cannot cool it because it's very dilute. The sorbent must be selective for CO2 in a real air condition. When a sorbent says it can capture a good amount of CO2 in a mixed gas of CO2 and nitrogen, then we should ask, will water impact significantly on CO2 capture? Or if the sorbent can separate CO2 from a mixed gas very well, then we should ask if oxygen in the mixed air, will the oxygen decrease the selectivity of CO2? Because the size of the oxygen is similar as the size of CO2 per molecule. The binding energy of CO2 and the sorbent cannot be very tightly or very loosely either. A high sorbent capacity and kinetics can reduce the cost of direct air capture. And some sorbents lose their capacity after running 10 or 20 cycles. However, our analysis shows direct air capture needs to undergo 100,000 cycles to make it practical at industrial level. And also we need the demonstration and the scaling, right? It needs to be shown to be cost effective. Last, I want to say CO2 dumped in the atmosphere is like an event of Great Stink in London, 1858. Humans dumped their waste into River Thames. Hot weather caused the bad smell. And also carbon capture is like a waste management. If one day morning you get up from your apartment and think for this for a moment, you realize I dump a bunch of waste in front of your yard, you probably will call police on me, right? And I said, wait a minute, I tried very hard and I dumped 10% less than last year in your front of your yard. You won't buy it, right? You think I'm a crazy guy. So at this moment, you immediately notice we're not treating CO2 capture as waste management. We have to have zero emission, not the 10% reduction in the next year. So we also can think direct air capture could democratize things because it allows you and I to go after emissions. We are responsible. Every time when I step on gas pedal of my car, I put CO2 out, nobody else. So starting to go after that might be a good starting point. And thank you for your attention.
Thanks for that great presentation, Dr. Xiaoyang, and for sharing with us about the different advantages of moisture swing. I'm curious if you could share a little bit about why it seems that moisture swing approaches have received less attention perhaps than thermal swing and more recently electro swing approaches. Do you see that same kind of lack of attention? And if so, why do you think that is?
Yeah, I totally agree about that. In my opinion, I think the new technology needs people to discuss and to validate. It takes time. The thermal swing, by using amine materials, scientists and the society, they are familiar with this technology because it comes from the flue gas scrubbing. However, it uses heat instead of water, so its energy consumption is higher than moisture swing. And also for the electrochemical swing, Professor Hatton from MIT working on that technology. It's also very new, and in my opinion, very little group are understanding this technology. It also needs time to make people understand. But currently, that the electron swing problem is based on that the paper they publish, they can only capture CO2 from a high concentration area, not from ambient air. The 400 ppm. So moisture swing technology has its advantages. And we also proposed some different angles and new ideas to capture CO2 based on the moisture swing technology. It's like we have to use a passive wind, not by using air blower to blow air through the sorbent, because that's going to be, we can save a lot of energy and cost if we use a passive wind to carry CO2 through the sorbent. And also we believe if we produce small scale device and produce a lot of them, so we can reduce cost a lot from the learning curve. by mass production. We prefer the small scale device instead of big, large scale power plant or direct air capture plant. So these ideas, we need to convey these ideas, the advantages, and to convince people and discuss with people why moisture swing has advantages. I think it takes time.
When I hear you talk about the technology and a lot of kind of what's needed, which is getting the sorbent cost lower, for me, the first example that comes to mind is solar panels and how we got those costs lower. I'm wondering with solar panels, right? We have new research, we have perovskites and new technologies, but a lot of the scale up has just been economies of scale in Gen 1, Gen 2 panels. So I'm just, if you think about direct air capture and sorbents, is there like a parallel, right? Like, do we just need scale? Do we need new research? Like, what does this look like in terms of getting the cost to $20 or $30 a ton of CO2?
Yes, that's a very good question. I think we can achieve this by two ways. One is we have to improve the technology of the sorbent, because the sorbent is the heart in the direct air capture device, right? If we can increase its capacity, very simply, if we can increase capacity by 2 times, we can reduce the cost by 2 times because we capture more CO2 per day. And also, if we can improve its kinetics and other performance like stabilities, we can reduce the cost a lot. And another thing I think is we can improve from engineering perspective. We can reduce the cost a lot by learning from mass production. We have to start working on it to reduce the cost. If we only talk this technology in lab and on paper, we cannot reduce the cost. So I believe we can achieve this in these 2 ways.
Yeah, so we've been talking about moisture swing and its general applications, but can you think of some particular industries or areas where moisture swing absorbents may perform particularly well for carbon capture?
Yes, I have some suggestions. One is our moisture swing sorbent because it costs least energy and it can be used for greenhouse. Crops like CO2, we can increase its yields a lot by providing the CO2 inside the greenhouse. We can capture CO2 from ambient and ask farmers to wet the sorbent to increase the CO2 concentration in that greenhouse. Or we can make some automated machine to work this way. Also, this sorbent can be used for flower transportation to keep flower fresh longer because we can adjust the CO2 concentration in the transportation box. But these are just small applications. We have to produce a lot of our device, like I said, 100 million of the device to solve the climate change issue. And we can produce capture the CO2 to synthetic fuel or put the captured CO2 underground. The market can decide the balance of the 2 choices.
Yeah, it's super interesting you talk about farmers because for moisture swing, it's kind of like a tree, like you were saying, you irrigate it and you get the fruit, which is the CO2 released out of it. And in the meantime, you let it dry and absorb the CO2.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, that's a super interesting metaphor.
Yes.
This is really interesting, right? And like the work you've done is super impactful. A lot of our listeners and members of the open air community are also working on prototypes and have technical backgrounds. I think a lot of them would be, and even we're really curious, how did you even get interested in carbon, absorption materials and moisture swing more specifically? Like, what was that journey like?
Okay, sure. Thanks for this question. I really love science when I was a little kid. I was curious a lot of things I didn't understand. So after PhD, I decided I will work on carbon management to solve the climate change issue. I want to contribute my efforts in this area because it's becoming more and more serious. And I learned a lot of the background knowledge. I realized that the only way we can solve the climate change issue now is negative carbon emission. Renewable energy is not fast enough to transit energy infrastructure from fossil carbon to renewable energy. That costs the time. And if we want to solve the climate change issue and make our CO2 concentration below 450 ppm or 500 ppm, whatever the level is, we have to make us in a carbon neutral world. And I'm very interested in the new technology. I learned there are a lot of direct air capture technologies like amine material, like a strong alkaline, and I think they are consuming too much energy. We have to think out of the box to design a sorbent won't cost too much energy, because if we want to just simply transfer the flue gas separation technology to direct air capture technology, that won't work because it's energy consuming. So I learned from the paper of Professor Lechner's, and I realized, oh, moisture swing, that's so interesting. So I showed my interest to Professor Lechner, and I joined his group, and he told me one story one day, and he said, we have already found this material. It can capture CO2 in dry condition and release in wet. We have to understand its underlying mechanism. Then we can rationally design the next generation sorbent in the future to lower its cost and improve its performance, because we have to know where the power is from, right? And he added one thing. He said, if you can tell me where the power is from, you can get your PhD and graduate. So I have no choice but to figure this reason out, right? With curiosity, of course. So I started by using atomistic modeling to figure out where the power is from. And now we can rationally design the next generation materials to lower its cost and improve its performance. So this is my journey, and what was going on, what is going on, and my wish in the future. Thank you.
That is really amazing, Yang. And
yeah.
I mean, I think it's really interesting, right? Like you always were interested in science, and you kind of found almost like a scientific principle that worked and that, like solved the problem. I guess a quick follow-up is like, who discovered this material first, right? Like were they walking in a field? Did the apple fall on their head? Like, what was the discovery process?
Oh yeah, this material, the ion exchange resin, it was used in water treatment surrounding for a very long time. They want to exchange the hazardous ions from water to clean the water. And our research was inspired from the nano confinement, because the ion hydration is kind of energy that's very strong when it is in the bulk water surrounding. But if we put it into a nanopore surrounding, everything changes. The hydrogen bond, maybe you're familiar, the O and the H, oxygen and hydrogen bond. It changes a lot, and we think maybe its chemical reaction degree also be changed. So we studied these a series of unconventional reversible chemical reactions, and we realized how to use the water as a trigger to turn on and turn off of the chemical reaction. And we suddenly realized this can be used for direct air capture, and that was amazing. And I felt very excited when I figured out this mechanism and its underlying chemistry.
Yeah, that's super cool to hear about how we're repurposing existing technologies towards this big new challenge that we have of CO2 capture and basically dealing with CO2 in all these different environments that we're working in.
Yes.
And we're also big fans of Dr. Klaus Lachner here at Open Air, so it's cool to hear about your work with him as well. Seems like a funny guy.
I felt very excited to be here also. I'm one of your community right now. Yes.
Great. So I guess maybe to close out, since, as we mentioned before, Open Air is a community full of direct air capture enthusiasts working on research and policy, and there's a lot of scientists and engineers, others are in activism and business. Are there any problems or things that you're working on right now that our community could help you with?
Yes, definitely. First, I want to say, I just said, I'm also one of your community right now, so we can work this together. And I believe the best research coming out from a massive discussion and experiments, and from people have different background. like the idea to design the sorbent, not just by synthesis like chemistry. We also need to study the mechanics of the material. And we need to demonstrate this material with a control system that might need people who have electronic background or electrical engineering, like Charles Yu. And we also need to convert CO2 to synthetic fuel or put it underground, because after capturing CO2, we need to figure out where to put them. And also maybe in the future, we need to develop the AI system to let the machine itself to figure out when we need to capture CO2, when we need to convert CO2 to fuel, when we need to deposit CO2 underground. And we also need the scientists from computer science background. Yeah, I'm trying to say we need our strong community to work together, and I hope I can contribute many efforts to our community to advance this technology of direct air capture.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, climate change is going to be an all hands on board, room for everyone to help out.
Yes.
So yeah, thanks for taking the time and sharing with us about your research and moisture swing, Dr. Yang.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.